Joining me from his electorate of Maranoa in Queensland is the Nationals leader, David Littleproud. David Littleproud, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Tanya Plibersek, she says your nuclear power plants are going to cost $387 billion. What do you say to that?
Well, that'd be a fraction of what their plan by 2030 of 82% renewables would cost. It's $1.5 trillion, and that's Net Zero Australia who's articulated those numbers, and then $7 to $9 trillion between 2060. And so this is why we're saying we want to leave a legacy that just doesn't last for 15 to 20 years, which is what a turbine or a solar panel might last, or even a battery. We want something that'll last 80 to 100 years, something that'll build baseload power into our grid, that'll underpin manufacturing, that'll keep hospital lights on, something that renewables and batteries can't do. This is a threshold question Australians need to understand.
All right.
If you don't have baseload power, you can't keep subsidising manufacturing to keep it in this country. And you only have to look at your lived experience. Anthony Albanese spent $6.5 billion in trying to make an election promise of a $275 reduction because he's got this all renewables approach.
They say their poles and wires, the renewables rollout, whatever, is $121 billion, not $1 trillion, like the opposition's been saying. What do you say to that?
Well, I think what you need to look at is what Net Zero Australia are talking about, because what you need to do is plug them in with 28,000 kilometres of transmission lines and then rely on a whole lot of battery technology that at the moment has very limited capacity and would have to spend a lot to actually increase that capacity to build baseload power. And it simply can't be done anywhere around the world. But also, it doesn't take into account what they're going to cost you in your food security, because we're tearing up prime agricultural land that takes away food supply, that lifts up food prices. Right. And so this is where this folly of what this government is going down an ideological view doesn't match the reality. When Net Zero Australia are telling us, who are eminently qualified, telling us $1.5 trillion, I think that says a fair bit about Labor's plan. And you can feel that in your energy bills now.
You didn't even flinch, though, when I said $387 billion for your nuclear power plants. Is that in the ballpark?
Well, we'll be very upfront and clear about the costings and about the scale and capacity of what nuclear energy will firm up and transition some of our coal-fired power stations across with gas. And you're going to need a lot of gas, as they will with an all-renewables approach, but there will be renewables in that mix as well. So we'll be very upfront and honest. There is an upfront capital cost. Peter Dutton and I have been very clear about that. There is an upfront cost, but you get to amortise that over 80 to 100 years. Not have some multinational from overseas slip in, take a 15 to 20 year dividend out of the Australian people, run back to wherever they're from. This is something the Australian people will own. And so there's a big difference about the upfront costs and the dividends that it'll pay back over the life of the assets, not a 20-year asset, but a 100-year asset.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the CSIRO found in its recent Gen Cost report it would cost about $8.6 billion to construct a reactor, and the first reactor would be more expensive. Do you accept that calculation?
Look, that part of the Gen costs, we've been more than upfront saying that is in the ballpark, but we'll be very specific about those costs and those upfront costs. And we're also being upfront about who owns this. Not some carpetbagger from overseas comes in, takes it all and runs back for a 15 to 20 year period. This will be something that lasts for 80 to 100 years. There's a big difference in this. And yes, there always has been an upfront cost, but it's the long-term dividend that's paid back to the Australian people in their ownership and in reliable baseload power.
Have you got calculations then on operating cost, which I assume the $387 billion that Tanya Plibersek is talking about takes into account?
Well, we'll be very clear those costings will be upfront and honest, and there's international experience where you've got established nuclear power plants up and running, where you can benchmark and look at the moment. So those costings will be delivered. We wanted to show respect to those communities that we announced. We wanted to take well before the election, and this is a significant change in policy that the Nationals and Liberals are bringing, and we want to take the Australian people on that journey with us. We want to be honest about that, and I think it was firstly starting that 2.5 year consultation process with those communities in making sure they understood, and then the next phase will be the delivery of those costings and what our energy mix will look like, not putting all our energy eggs in one basket.
All right, well, let's talk about the overseas experience since you mentioned it. The Hinkley C nuclear power plant in Britain has blown out from an original 20 to 30 billion Australian to an estimated $92 billion. Does that sound warning bells for you?
Well, we'll learn from international experience, but that's why we haven't been the first ones to go down this path. And what we will do is draw on the international experience as well, where it has been successful, like in the United Arab Emirates, and making sure that we partner with those that have the expertise, like Hitachi, Westinghouse, to have a partnership in the construction operation to give confidence. But Australians will own this, and the Australian government will oversight this by having that ownership structure, and that's the common sense solution that we'll have. But again, there is an upfront cost, but we'll be upfront and clear about what that upfront cost is. But this is a 100-year piece of infrastructure, not a 15 to 20-year piece of infrastructure.
The CSIRO also found it'd take 15 years to build one, yet you've said 2 small modular reactors could be in place in 2035 to 2037. Isn't that a bit optimistic?
No, if the Australian people give us a mandate, and much of the challenges in terms of timelines, as I understand, is around approval processes. Now, that's why it's important that the Australian people own this, and the Australian government is their proxy in managing and operating and building and construction. And that's why we want to work constructively with the states, but we will use powers if we have to, but we don't want to. We want to be able to say to the state premiers, the people of Australia have given us a clear direction. They expect political leadership from all levels. They expect us all to work together and to get on with the job. And that's where day one, we'll be sitting down and starting that. And that's why we've started that journey in consultation well before with those communities. And then the next phase will be after the election of a Dutton Littleproud government, that we start that process immediately. And we expect the premiers to be cooperative with that.
In this announcement, you could have announced 1 or 2 nuclear power plants on 7 sites, but you went the whole box and dice. 7 power plants, 1 in each mainland state. Why?
Well, this is what you see is what you get. This is exactly the plan that we're going to take to the Australian people. We're not going to hide anything. We're not going to say, well, there's more or there's less. This is it. This is exactly what Peter Dutton and I are looking the Australian people in the eye and saying, this will be where these nuclear power sites will go because after geotechnical assessment, this is the best place for them, that they can get into the grid without the need for the 28,000 kilometres of transmission lines to play a role in underpinning manufacturing in this country and grow manufacturing in this country without the Australian taxpayer having to continue to subsidise it. And so we're being very upfront and honest. And then the next phase will be very upfront and honest as well about the costings. We haven't flinched on this. And don't underestimate our resolve to get this done. What you see is what you get out of Peter Dutton and I. We're going to look Australian square in the eye. I'm going to tell you how it is. And we've told you how it is, where we're going to put these places. And I think that's what the Australian people want. They want strong leadership. They want their leaders to stand up and tell them what they're planning, and then our job is to get on with it and get it done as soon as we're elected.
And why government owned? Was this something the Nationals pushed for? Is this a sign you believe the market wouldn't go for this? Do you think this will assuage safety concerns that it would be government owned?
No, this is something Peter and Dutton and I both firmly believed in, and we pushed to make sure that it was what was taken forward. Not that there was any real resistance to it, because what we're seeing, what we're experiencing is many of these overseas multinationals coming in cleaning up at Australian taxpayers' expense. But we wanted to leave a legacy, particularly with a nuclear-powered site, that could give even greater comfort that the Australian people would own it, but also their government would operate it and make sure there was no corners cut, even though we are very confident in the technology. We're about to put our submariners, we're going to sleep our submariners next to these reactors in a pressurised submarine hundreds of metres underneath the sea. So we have no issues on the confidence of this technology, but we felt it important that there should be a dividend, there should be a legacy for future Australians to enjoy, not multinationals from overseas coming in and cleaning up and going home.
What about the argument that because of the expense of building these plants, they will drive up power bills?
No, again, and that's why we want to own it and control it. And that's where, if the government has control over it, then we have greater capacity to reach in and making sure that we can manage the construction with these expert companies that have experience. in making sure that we get this right. And that's also about making sure the planning's done efficiently and appropriately to drive down the costs, because obviously if you take longer as well to get the planning approvals and get it moving, that adds to the costs as well. So that is the common sense solution that we're going to take to the Australian people. And if we're given a mandate, we expect cooperation from all levels of government, with unions and industry to get on with the job.
Let me play what you said during the week about the Coalition's plans in terms of large-scale wind farms and other renewables projects, and then what the opposition leader in the Senate, Simon Birmingham, said.
We don't need to go down an all renewables approach. We've signed up to net zero by 2050, but we don't need a linear pathway to achieve that. We should have a mixture in our energy grid. We shouldn't put all our energy eggs into one basket and have an all renewables approach.
There is absolutely a place for large-scale renewables as part of a technology-neutral approach in Australia. It's an important part of the mix that will help us to reduce our emissions over time.
You're at odds there, aren't you, Mr Littleproud?
Well, I don't know how. I don't know on what planet anyone would think we were. I've said that you wouldn't put all your energy eggs in one basket. So that does mean that we'll transition some of our coal to nuclear. We'll have gas with CCS, and there will be place for renewable energy, but not the scale that we're going down an all renewables approach. I actually clearly articulated
But he says there'll be large-scale renewables. You said there wouldn't be large-scale renewables, didn't you?
No, I've said we will avoid the need for as much and greater because we are going down an all renewables approach. That's just simple math. If you're going down an all renewables approach that this government is, but you have an alternative where you are simply going to take some of that and put it into baseload power generated through nuclear energy, then the math's pretty simple. You're not going to have as much large-scale renewable energy into the system. And what I've also gone on to say is what we should explore is try to give energy independence to households and business where it's possible and piggyback off what states are doing by putting renewable energy on an environment it can't destroy, which is on rooftops, and whether that's supporting batteries, because what we're experiencing and the real life experience that I'm experiencing here is you're seeing your fellow Australians' livelihoods being torn up because of this ideological view of an all renewables. All we've got is transmission lines, solar panels and wind turbines taking up our productive landscape, tearing up remnant vegetation. And what, we don't count just because the Teals and Labor think that we should go down this linear pathway of an all renewables approach. Don't your fellow Australians count? And I just say we seek to understand those Teal members of Parliament, but they should seek to understand us of the burden they're asking regional Australians to bear. I mean, it is so entitled for them to look down their nose, dripping with self-righteous sanctimony,
all right,
saying this is the only pathway.
You're on quite the roll about the Teals there, but we're nearly out of time. Look, there is more of this coalition energy policy, I understand, to come. Does that include money for solar subsidies for people who put solar panels on their roofs?
Yeah, well, look, obviously we're exploring all the options in terms of everything outside nuclear, because if you change the mixture of the grid, then obviously that pathway has to be credible, and that also includes but a lot of gas to be put in with carbon capture storage in the right place. But we'll be unveiling exactly how we intend to get there and the mechanisms and the costs of which to achieve that. That's as we've demonstrated. We've shown courage of our conviction. We're going to continue to be upfront and honest.
So possible solar subsidies?
Identified two places.
Possible
I'm not putting any possibilities in or out. No scoop today, mate, but what I will do is say that we will make sure that we responsibly look at all the options to protecting our agricultural land, but understanding renewables will play a role, that gas will have to play a role, the carbon capture storage, but so too with coal and nuclear being in a transition phase.
All right, just finally, two-pronged question. What do you make of the way the government's played this in terms of some of the things on social media government backbenchers have posted, and in response, I guess, what do you make of Peter Dutton calling the PM a child in a man's body? Do you agree?
Well, I do, and unfortunately the Prime Minister had an opportunity to lead and to look at this and work through the issues that we're putting forward and saying, well, if there's an alternative, here's ours. But instead he's used some churlish view to put out memes. When he is leading this country and he's about to put Australian submariners and lie and sleep them next to this technology every night, why would you demean it in such a puerile way when this is safe technology? And if that's the only a rebut he's got to our energy policy, then I would have thought a Prime Minister should be above that. And if that's all he's got, he's not fit to be Prime Minister. And unfortunately, I think all he's done is diminished the office of Prime Minister, and he's diminished himself while sitting in it.
Well, it's certainly going to be a rough and tumble election campaign, judging by the events of the past few days. David Littleproud, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.